But it's my honor to present at my favorite time of the day, which is just after lunch. I have about 5 minutes for my presentation to keep you awake and interested in a topic that was already widely discussed today and is so in the industry, which is healthcare and how big data can actually contribute to better healthcare within Europe. So since I'm talking about health, I thought maybe to wake you up after lunch, a bit of a physical exercise to prove a hypothesis I have might help. So here's a question and some exercise for you. If you had your blood test taken over the last 5 years, may I please ask you to stand up? Okay, it's almost everyone. Please, can you? Okay, thank you very much. I wanted to prove a hypothesis. So if you today have online access to the blood test results, please stand up. Oh, wow. So if you're American, can you please sit down? Right. So I think my hypothesis somehow works out, not quite 100%, but it's very much in line what we were trying to discuss within the Young Leaders Group, which is why is it that currently we as the patients and as the data sources of medical data do not have control and even access to our own data? So what is currently blocking that from happening? So we asked ourselves questions like, if we don't have access, surely it's stored somewhere digitally in a hospital where you've taken your blood test. Who then has access? Who owns that data? Who stores that data? And who would I actually trust with storing that data? So in my case, I live in the UK at the moment. That is the UK National Health System, somehow run by the government. If I look at all of the data privacy violations and people losing laptops and so on the trains, I'm not sure I would actually entrust the government with my very private health data. Would I rather entrust that data to organizations like Google or Microsoft or anywhere dealing with secure cloud environments in a much more commercial environment? If it is somewhere centrally stored and should be accessible, even though it seems not to be, so none of you has access to this, why do I still have to travel with a lot of paper documents? So I have to take my vaccination booklet with me. I don't know what the format is you have this in, but I can never remember when I had my last tetanus vaccination and these types of things. I can never remember my childhood diseases because I was too young to remember. So typically what I used to do is call my mom and ask her actually if she can tell me if I had chickenpox or not. Unfortunately, I cannot contact her anymore, so what am I going to do right now? So I need to write it down on a piece of paper, and so wouldn't that be nice to have all of that on one of those things and actually go to the GP in the south of France and tell them, these are my blood test results, these are my childhood diseases and so on. So if then we look at that environment in a digitally available, so the electronic health record or the patient health record as we try to call it, if that was available, who is currently selling this? Who is benefiting from it? We heard a lot of talk in the previous sessions around pharma companies and analysts and so on using that data for the greater good, arguably, but ultimately also for commercial purposes. Do these commercial purposes, are they in line with my ethical environment and my sort of moral understanding of what would be good and what would not be good? We had that question before around Down syndrome, so recognizing that already before the child is born. What does that actually mean ethically? So ultimately, what needs to be done that the patient, or me as a patient, all of us as patients, can be put in control over our own medical data? I think to answer that question, we sat down over many days and nights and had great fun to actually come up with various options and lots of very good discussions on this topic. Ultimately, we found that this discussion, obviously, we're not the first ones thinking about this, so lots of local governments as well as global communities have thought about this. including the likes of Google and all of the larger sort of analytics organizations. The solution is, I think, the end result of all of this. So eventually, we're all hoping that there will be a centrally available electronic health record. So in the future, I can actually access it on my smartphone rather than having to carry around those paper documents. But what we found in our discussion is that, however, standardization, integration, the governance, the technology, all of those areas are already pretty well defined. What is not clear and what causes a lot of discomfort, and actually we had lots of, I would almost call it disputes in our team, is what is the right market model or the right commercial model for such an environment, such a platform to be established. Okay. So when I look at the commercial model, I should probably progress the slides at the same time. There's a whole ecosystem of interested parties in my health data. So that goes from government bodies, healthcare organizations, through to insurance companies, commercial organizations. Even my retail store would probably be interested in my health results or my latest blood tests, so they can identify what best, I don't know, bread to sell me. Forgive me, I'm not a medical practitioner. But and ultimately then in that discussion, who would gain from it? Who would benefit from it? Who would lose out? There are organizations. I had a conversation with a colleague over lunch where we were talking about, do health insurance companies still make sense in such an environment when the data is readily available for the whole ecosystem or the whole commercial competitive environment of insurers? Who would become the innovators? So if you think about smartphone apps on top of such an environment, Chris was talking about this in his talk this morning, would there not be sort of small organizations, entrepreneurs coming up with really great ideas, innovative ideas, to use that data and make it available to either patients or other organizations in a way that everyone could benefit from it? Who would be the risk takers? Right. So, I mean, a lot of the legal and data privacy issues and so on are still not widely discussed, and rightly so. In Europe, it's a much more restricted environment, whereas in the US, you have a much more open society. Eventually, the risks then balance out over time. But, what is the right approach to this, and who would drive that from a legal aspect, from a compliance aspect, and who would govern that whole environment? So what we came out with, and again, I only have 5 minutes, so I ask more questions than I actually provide answers, but please come and see us, read our white paper if you want more information. But it is that there are three key aspects to that solution which needs to be taken into consideration rather than just providing the solution as sort of an integrated platform, which is, on the one hand, our main focus, which was the market model. So is it a competitive model as opposed to the current sort of monopoly per government within Europe? What are the benefits of a commercial competitive environment? And is it more like an environment, for example, as we have in our banking system? I have a bank account, and if I'm not happy with the services the bank provides me, I'd happily move over to another bank, and they lose me as a customer. So a competitive model has a lot of advantages. Obviously, I want to have an overarching governing body who looks at the legal aspects, who looks at compliance, the standards, regulations, and so on of all of this. And that, in our view, should be a centrally governed environment, ideally run by a European body in this case. And ultimately, in the middle, then you see it, so how can we establish the patient trust? So it's all about us as individuals owning our own data and deciding who I want to give access to this, potentially even selling it. If there is a research organization who wants to use my non-anonymized data in order to create some great health treatment, so for the greater good, I mean, we talked about this before a lot, that's brilliant, but I want to decide if I think this is within my ethical boundaries and if I believe that this is for the greater good or if it's a commercial organization. Okay. So ultimately, to drive then the three areas where we talked about solidarity, so really to be able to share that information, the security, enabling the trust of the patients, and ultimately the sort of prosperity, so that we can actually generate new treatments, that we can generate some benefit from big data in healthcare. Just to finish off, because it was obviously not myself coming up with all of this, may I ask all of the team members of the Young Leader Group to stand up, and please give them a round of applause. There's some brilliant thinking in there.